Let's talk really quickly about data types, because data types give us one more piece of information about a variable that's important. So in Python, there are many different data types. We're going to start out by talking about 4. I'm not going to give all the data types to you at once because I don't want to overwhelm everybody. The first one we've already played around with. It's a string, sometimes also known as a string literal. And what that means is whatever's inside those quotes, you can always tell it's a string because it's surrounded by quotes. Single quotes or double quotes are fine in Python. And literally, the container has these characters in it. M-Y space lowercase n A-M-E space I-S space B-I-L-L. That's what it's equal to, literally. That's why it's called a string literal. If I put these two numbers inside quotes, those become a string literal where it's literally equal to 1, 1, which is different than the number 11. The computer does not see those two things the same. So an integer, or an int for short, is a number with no decimal. Okay, it's a whole number. It can be positive or negative, but it has to be a whole number. It can also be 0. Floating point or a float is a number with a decimal, can be positive or negative, can also be 0. If I have a float that is equal to 0, it will be 0.0. That's how it will be written in Python. So float, integer, no decimal, float has a decimal. Boolean can only be one of 2 values. It either is true or it's false. So Boolean or bool is true or false. Note that these are not strings. There are no quotes, and the first letter is uppercase. So uppercase T, uppercase F. If you write them as lowercase, the computer won't understand them as Boolean values. So true or false. We also have lots of list types and a few other random types in Python. We're not going to cover those today. So one more tip, and this is not a Python rule. This is a free tip from Bill Moseley to you. One more tip for naming variables that I will give you, and I will recommend that you use this in this class and even beyond this class. It's a practice that I use pretty religiously when I'm coding, and it's helped me a ton. And that is, I include the data type in the variable name. Because if I use a data type and a name that is somewhat descriptive, then I can tell just by looking at that variable name what type of data is in there and also what it's for, which helps me a ton with that whole like readability next week kind of thing. So if I wanted to have somebody's name saved as a string, I could say str name, right? And then it might be equal to something like this. I could have int age for an integer, float GPA. I wish. That wasn't me in school, guys. I got here, but just barely. Float GPA, bool, like me, as in, do you like me, yes or no, check this box, you know, the old thing. Boolean, like me. And so what you'll notice is I'm using an interesting pattern of naming these, right? I start out lowercase, and every time I have a new word in that variable name, I'm not putting a space in there because you can't put a space in a variable name. You could use underscore, but I'll be honest with you, it's a little bit slower to type. And if you're typing 1,000 or 1,000,000 lines of code, you get tired of that. So variable names, you always want to think about this when you're naming a variable, like how many more times am I going to have to type this variable name? So you want it to be descriptive, but maybe not super long, not too descriptive. So you'll notice these weird uppercase and lowercase patterns. Okay, this is called camel case. It's very common in coding. And the pattern is that you start out lowercase and each new word gets an uppercase letter. It's not because we have to name it that way, it's for readability. Because compare reading this is camel case, to this, right? It's much harder to read because you can't see where the new words start. So this is just a pattern that I stick to, and you've maybe already noticed it as I've been writing code, that this is how I name my variables. And I recommend that you name yours that way too.